From former mining towns whose aged streets are supposedly stalked by the dead after dark, to historic house museums where it's told the spirits of residents long since deceased still roam. Are you ready to explore our second list of some of the most haunted places in Colorado? Number 5. The Fitzsimons Building. The Fitzsimons Building, formerly the Fitzsimons Army Medical Center and located off of East 17th Place in Aurora, Colorado, is a historic structure now included in the University of Colorado system that acts as part of the Anschutz Medical Campus. Historically, through World War I, the Army would see an increase in tuberculosis cases in soldiers, and a facility on site, initially called Army Hospital 21, was formally dedicated in 1918. In 1920, Army Hospital 21 would be renamed as the Fitzsimons Army Hospital in honor of Lieutenant William T. Fitzsimons, the first medical officer killed in World War I. And in 1941, a new main building recognized only as Building 500 would be erected on site and would open its doors as the largest structure in Colorado. Through World War II, this facility would be utilized to treat returning casualties and would grow to become one of the Army's primary medical training campuses. In 1999, operations on site were ceased. The property was redeveloped for civilian use, and in 2006, it would reofficialize itself as the Anschutz Medical Campus, which remains in operation, treating patients to this day. Sadly, a number of deaths have transpired across this aged premises, including those of several patients resulting from the attack on Pearl Harbor, and it's thought past tragedies have left lasting supernatural scars, with those frequenting the Fitzsimons Building reporting disembodied voices and footsteps, objects sighted moving on their own, and doors that open and close by themselves. A series of underground tunnels connect the old medical buildings, and those who have braved exploring around below the earth have described abnormal waves of insects and the constant feelings of being watched or even of being stalked. Also reported throughout the area are strange knocking and scratching sounds from within walls, shadowy figures spied following the living, and encounters with the full-bodied entities of soldiers, doctors, nurses, orderlies, and unidentified patients. Lastly, following a heart attack in 1955, Dwight D. Eisenhower would be treated on site on the top floor, a location that many today claim is one of the building's most haunted sections. Those who've adventured the top floor have reported extreme cold spots and run-ins with the apparition of a woman who many mistake for living before watching her fade away. Number 4. The Molly Brown House Museum. The Molly Brown House Museum, also known as the House of Lions, and located off of Pennsylvania Street in Denver, Colorado, is a historic house turned museum, recognized for acting as former abode to American philanthropist, activist, and socialite Margaret Brown, or more adequately nicknamed the Unsinkable Molly Brown, following her surviving of the sinking of the RMS Titanic. Historically, this abode was first constructed by architect William A. Lang through the 1880s for Isaac and Mary Large. However, the Larges would suffer financial ruin in 1893 following the repeal of the Sherman-Silver Purchase Act, and in 1894 would be forced to sell the house to James Joseph Brown, Margaret's husband. In 1898, the house's title would be transferred to Margaret, some suspect due to JJ's ailing health, after which it would spend a good deal of time being rented out and would even so much as act as governor's mansion in 1902, while the actual governor's mansion was subjected to remodels and modernizations. In 1926, Margaret would transform the residence into a boarding house, which she would leave under the care of her housekeeper, and following Margaret's passing in 1932, it would serve for a time as a Jane Addams Whole House for men. Sadly, the property would fall into disrepair over the years, and in 1970 was actually spec'd for demolition, until a group of concerned locals banded together to form Historic Denver Incorporated, purchased the plot, and set to work on renovations. Into the present, the Molly Brown House Museum remains in the hands of Historic Denver Incorporated, who offers free public tours, events, and all manner of educational materials. Quite classically, the whole of this aged property is believed to be haunted by the spirits of its former residents, and of those who loved it in life. And across the premises, both staff and guests have reported furniture found rearranged inexplicably, extreme cold spots, and instances of light bulbs unscrewing themselves. Several informal investigations have yielded orbs in photography, high EMF levels, and crystal clear EVPs, and other accounts describe doors that open and close on their own, disembodied footsteps and voices, and encounters with both shadowy figures and apparitions in old-fashioned attire. Lastly, phantom pipe smoke, believed to be tied to the spirit of JJ, has been smelled wafting about, and the manifestation of a woman in a Victorian-era dress, believed to be that of the unsinkable Molly Brown herself, has been spied wandering the grounds, and has even been known to interact with the living to a surprising extent, some say, as she keeps an eye on her beloved home. Number 3. The University of Denver. The University of Denver, located off South University Boulevard in Denver, Colorado, is a private, non-profit 4-year university, boasting the title of being the oldest independent private university in the Rocky Mountain region of the United States, that's also recognized for its beautiful and sprawling campus, which is actually a designated arboretum. Historically, in March of 1864, what was then known as the Colorado Seminary was founded under former Governor of the Colorado Territory John Evans in the newly established city of Denver, which was little more than an extended mining camp. At the time of its founding, this seminary was non-sectarian, with operations managed by the Methodist Episcopal Church, and some of its first official campus buildings would sprout up in downtown Denver through the 1860s and 70s. Unfortunately, the school would fail to prosper under Denver's rough frontier atmosphere, resulting in the seminary moving its operations to our present-day campus onto land donated by one Rufus Clark, which, at the time, was located a ways from downtown, and in 1880, the institute would re-officiate itself as the University of Denver. Although, on a side note, even today, its legal moniker remains the Colorado Seminary. Across campus, University Hall stands as the school's oldest structure, with a build date of 1890, and the Chamberlain Observatory, which stands just a few blocks from campus and remains in operation, was constructed just 4 years following, in 1894. Over its existence, the University of Denver's campus has expanded substantially, and today stretches over 125 acres, which accommodate around 11,000 students. Chillingly, a number of stories of the inexplicable have been passed through generations of alumni, involving spine-tingling paranormal activity. The Marjorie Reed Hall, which was constructed in 1928, is rumored to hold the spirit of its namesake, being Marjorie, who died in 1925, mysteriously and suddenly, either from an ailment or, as some suspect, from poison. And across the premises, many have reported disembodied whispers and echoes, constant electrical malfunctions, and objects spied moving on their own. The Mary Reed Building, which was constructed in 1932, is similarly purported to hold the ghost of its namesake, being Mary, and those who have frequented its bounds have described alarms sounding without cause, a chair in the library that's always warm as if someone unseen was just sitting in it, and sightings of a spectral woman rounding corners. Also within the Mary Reed Building, the DuPont room is rumored to be haunted by the ghost of Marcella DuPont, who made a generous donation for one of the building's study rooms. Additionally, both of these structures, Marjorie Reed Hall and the Mary Reed Building, were funded off donations from Mary Reed, mother of Marjorie. Lastly, the Buchtell House is suspected to be haunted by the restless spirit of Henry Buchtell, who some claim isn't happy with how his old abode is being treated, or about the parties that have since transpired there, and those who have frequented it have reported extreme cold spots, spontaneous booms and thumps from within walls, doors that slam on their own, and instances of alcoholic beverages found poured out or that go missing entirely. Number 2. Central City. Central City, or officially the City of Central, is a home rule municipality located within Gilpin and Clear counties in Colorado that was founded in 1859 during the height of the Pikes Peak gold rush, and that once held the title of being the richest square mile on Earth. Historically, in 1859, one John H. Gregory would happen across a massive gold vein, now recognized as the Gregory Lode, in the middle of Gregory Gulch, and within months, the Bates, Gunnell, Kansas, and Burroughs veins would follow suit. By 1860, around 10,000 prospectors from across the country had uprooted their lives in order to move closer to what was, at the time, called Mountain City. However, as the region's various veins began drying up, many would return to their homes, and by 1900, the populace had dropped back down to around 3,114. From 1900 to 1920, as veins were exhausted entirely, mining of the locale would decrease drastically, and while the profession would see a short revival in the area through the early 1930s, by World War II, interest would once again be lost, as gold made no difference in the fight. By the 1950s, the community's population would decrease to the hundreds. Through the 1990s, casino gambling would be introduced locally, and in 2004, a 4-lane parkway connecting the fated city to I-70 would be laid. Today, this old town boasts a population of just around 800 and acts as part of the Central City Blackhawk Historic District. Central City has long been surrounded in ghost stories and tales of the otherworldly, with a number of its landmarks toting their own separate local legends. At the Masonic Cemetery, it's told that every April 5th and November 1st, that the spirit of a beautiful woman in a black satin dress manifests just to lay flowers on the grave of one John Edward Cameron. Incidentally, another fable tells that the remains of a witch are buried within one of the old city's 4 cemeteries, that her grave is often shrouded in a green fog, and that whatever magic surrounds her place of final rest often makes the ground appear as if it's covered in maggots. The Opera House is rumored to hold the spirit of minor-turned-stage performer Mike Dougherty, who drank himself to death, and those frequenting its bounds have described the sensation of being bumped into or pushed by a presence unseen, extreme cold spots, disembodied footsteps from the balcony, and the heavy reek of alcohol and sweat. Sadly, countless miners were lost to cave-ins and accidents, and a number of old sites are said to be stalked by their restless spirits. One such site, the Pozo Shaft, has an infamous reputation for sending even the bravest running in terror from its depths, most muttering about lines of ghostly lamps and specters in old-fashioned miner's garb. Lastly, the Teller House plays home to the renowned Face on the Barroom Floor, a painting that was done by Herndon Davis in 1934. As legend has it, however, the portrait was actually completed by a miner whose wife had just passed from tuberculosis. It's said that, distraught, this man drank himself into a stupor and painted her likeness onto the floor before passing out, ne'er to awaken again. While this is likely nothing more than a tall tale, it hasn't stopped countless reports from those nearing the painting, detailing the disembodied sounds of the 2 lovebirds' voices, heard speaking tenderly to one another into eternity. Number 1. The Stanley Hotel. The Stanley Hotel, located off of East Wonderview Avenue in Estes Park, Colorado, is a historic lodging recognized for acting as inspiration for the Overlook Hotel in Stephen King's 1977 legendary horror classic, The Shining, in its respective 1980 film adaptation, and as set for the 1997 miniseries. Historically, in 1903, following a resurgence of tuberculosis, Yankee steam-powered car inventor Freeland Oscar Stanley and wife were advised to move to Estes Park for its elevation and climate. By 1907, Stanley had recovered entirely. However, during his stay at Estes Park, he formed a dream of transforming the locale into a resort town. The same year, he would start work on the Stanley Hotel. The Stanley's main hotel and concert hall were both completed by 1909. In 1910, the manor was finished, and in 1926, Stanley would sell his hotel to a private company, which incorporated under the sole purpose of maintaining operations. Unfortunately, this venture would fail. In 1929, Stanley would be forced to repurchase the property out of foreclosure, and in 1930, he would sell it yet again to Denver-based automobile and hotel magnate Roe Emery. Up until 1983, the Stanley would only remain open through the summer months, closing down for each winter, and in 1995, the whole of the site was purchased by the Grand Heritage Hotel Group, who retained ownership into the present. Today, the Stanley Hotel remains in operation, offering unparalleled accommodations, a restaurant, a spa, and even a bed and breakfast with panoramic views of the Rockies and of Lake Estes. In line with Stephen King's classic novel, the Stanley has long been surrounded by spine-tingling stories of various supernatural infestations and ghostly encounters. In 1974, during their residency in Boulder, King and his wife, Tabitha, would actually spend a single night at the Stanley. As it's told, King had been working on a book called Darkshine, which he was not exactly satisfied with. The Stanley was getting ready to close for the season, and it's said King wandered its halls after dark for a time, as the only guest there, before he found himself at the hotel's bar, where he was doted upon by a bartender named, you guessed it, Grady. King's experiences that night would ultimately inspire his book, The Shining, which would go on to change the entire genre that is horror as a whole, while also putting the Stanley on the map of paranormal enthusiasts everywhere. Strangely, while the events of The Shining are considered mostly fictional, the same room that acted as a center for some of the book's most terrifying thrills, being room 217, was the actual room number King stayed in during his visit to the Stanley, and to date, many claim 217 is one of the hotel's most haunted spaces. Oh, and before you superfans say anything, yes, the room featured in the movies was actually room 237, while the original script had the Overlook's most haunted room painted as 217, just as in the books. Timberline Lodge in Oregon, which was used for some of the movie's outside shots, called and asked production if they could change the room to a number that didn't actually exist on their property, as they feared guests would be too scared to rent out their room 217 moving forward, resulting in the change to 237. Another story surrounding this sinister accommodation tells that in 1911, head housekeeper Elizabeth Wilson was lighting lanterns in 217 when there was an explosion below that sent her straight through the floor into the McGregor dining room. Although Elizabeth survived this incident with not but 2 broken ankles, it's told she would continue working the hotel until her passing, which some say occurred on site, and stories tell her spirit, ever diligent, remains. A number of guests have reported having items moved, luggage unpacked, or even finding their rooms lit and prepared beautifully for them, a suspected courtesy of Liz. And unmarried couples sleeping in the same bed have awakened occasionally to find one of their party's belongings packed and by the door, a supernatural testament to the old housekeeper's firm and devout personality. Additionally, during the filming of the iconic comedy Dumb and Dumber, Jim Carrey would check in to room 217. The actor would later report being unable to make it through the entire night and would describe becoming so spooked that he ended up packing his things and leaving. But room 217 isn't the only hotspot within this expansive monstrosity. The staircase leading between floors from the hotel's lobby is commonly referred to as the Vortex, and has been described time and time again as a vicious spiral of paranormal energies, with those frequenting it reporting extreme cold spots, orbs visible to the naked eye, visual and auditory distortions, and waves of extreme dizziness and nausea. And from the grand staircase, the ghosts of Mr. and Mrs. Stanley have been sighted, hand in hand as they watch the crowd below with pleased expressions. Across the 4th floor, many have told of the sounds of children running, playing, and laughing heard from empty spaces, and room 428 is purportedly haunted by the spirit of a friendly cowboy who appears often at the foot of the bed, and who's been known to move furniture around. As if things couldn't get any more Stephen King, the Stanley's grounds also host a pet cemetery, and within, several have described encounters with the ghost of a golden retriever known as Cassie, as well as with a spectral white fluffy cat named Kanosh. Beneath the Stanley lie a series of tunnels and caverns rich in limestone and quartz that were previously utilized by employees, and some believe the immense mineral-rich environment may be what's holding so many spirits on hotel grounds. Chillingly, those who have neared these underground spaces in the present have reported disembodied whispers, the smell of baking goods with no discernible source, and run-ins with a ghostly gray cat with glowing green eyes, who regulars note seems not to be related to the pet cemetery. Lastly, in 2015, this lodging's main drive was altered, with its space being transformed into a hedge maze, reminiscent of one a certain Jack Torrance went chasing his family through. While no specific hauntings have been reported from within, many who have entered the maze have described being overcome with a sudden feeling of panic and of being unable to breathe, sensations that only fade once they've exited the area. Taking its fascinating history, its ties to pop culture, its influence on literature as a whole, and its host of purported otherworldly energies and local legends into account, we felt there really was no better choice than the Stanley Hotel as this list's most haunted place in Colorado. Thanks for joining us for our second list of some of the most chillingly haunted places in Colorado. If you enjoyed hearing our histories and ghost stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, throw us a like, and share us with anyone you feel could use a good scare. We'll see you next time.